Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland and Washington State Director of Commerce Mike Fong for this evening's telephone town hall. My name is Liz Larder, and I'm going to be tonight's moderator. I currently serve as Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland's Deputy Chief of Staff and District Director. If at any point during the call you would like to ask a question, please press *3, and if you would like to sign up for the Congresswoman's newsletter, please press *6. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland.
Well, thank you, Liz, and thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. I want to give a special thank you to Mike Fong, who is the Director of Washington State Commerce, for joining us as well. I know Mike and I are both looking forward to taking your questions and hearing directly from you about what matters most to you and your families in the 10th District. So it has been a busy year so far. A lot is happening both here in D.C. and especially at home, and that's why I organized this town hall meeting tonight. And I've been hearing a lot from folks. I've been hearing about how the increasing cost of living continues to be an issue for many families and seniors and constituents, including service members and their families who are stationed at Joint Base Lewis McChord. I've also heard questions about the infrastructure investments that we want to make. I've heard about inflation and what we can do to lower the cost of living for families. And I've also heard questions about, what's happening in Washington, D.C. There's a lot happening in the news with some dysfunction. Is government going to shut down? And so those things I know are all important to you. Inflation and the cost of living in things like groceries, the cost of health care, the cost of gas, the cost of housing, those are critical issues that I continue to hear about, and I'm committed to doing what I can at the federal level to address these concerns, and also working with our partners at the state and local level. The rising cost of living affects families, it affects senior citizens, it affects households across the entire South Sound. And since I was first elected to Congress, I have stayed focused on building an economy that works for everyone, building a nation and communities that are safe, just, and secure for all people. Today, I look forward to hearing your questions and hearing more about what I can do to advocate on your behalf in Congress. I want to start with the infrastructure bill that we passed last year. And this is really a historic investment that's going to deliver for both our state and, of course, the South Sound where we live. And it's very comprehensive in scope. It will be repairing roads, bridges, adding electric vehicle infrastructure so folks can charge their cars, adding more buses and light rail, and a really important one here on broadband, and that's high-speed internet. We want to make sure that students and small businesses and anyone who may need telemedicine can get online and to do it with reliable internet service. And of course, people need access to pedestrian and cyclist safety to make sure that, if you're walking, if you're riding your bike, that you're going to be able to do so safely. And this legislation, this infrastructure bill, invests in our communities. It will boost our economy. It's going to improve safety and just really support the needs of our growing community. We have lots of upgrades that we need. And just for example, I-5, US 101, McAllister Creek, and Mud Bay bridges. This is going to allow us to buy more buses from the electric fleet for Fierce Transit. In Tumwater, the Brownsville assessment for the Brewery District. Inner City Transit in Olympia for zero fare bus stop access. And even in Mason County, the Squaxin Island Tribe's new water source, which will help them build more housing to give them that infrastructure. So that's just a sample of some of the things that we're doing. But what's important here is that this is an infrastructure bill, but more than anything, it is a jobs bill. And this means that we need workers, and we want to be able to distribute well-paying jobs to people here at home. So as we look at some of the other things that we've been working on, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act. And from this bill, we expect that over 10 years, we will create 10,000 jobs. We'll invest over $5 billion in large-scale clean power generation. And these are referred to as once-in-a-generation investments, but I'm hopeful that as we bring these projects online, that we can actually make more investments as we move forward. But I would say that the marquee legislation in this act is really about reducing insulin to $35 a month as a cap. And that's incredibly important because of this Medicare cap, nearly 3,000 beneficiaries in the 10th District alone who rely on insulin to manage their diabetes will save nearly $600 a year. And because of this cap, 3 of the largest manufacturers of insulin are actually reducing their prices too. And so it's had an effect on the entire market. And that's going to save money for nearly 20,000 constituents in Washington's 10th district alone. So we have a lot to talk about tonight, but that's just a sampling of some of the things that I've been working on. I'm going to hand this off to Director Fong, but, we have a long way to go. There are lots of issues. There's a lot of work to do, but I'm very thrilled to be here with you tonight. I'm going to pass this to Mike Fong. Mike.
Great. Thank you, Congresswoman. And Liz, thanks for having me tonight. I'm really looking forward to answering questions from the 10th Congressional District. So folks at home have a little background on me. I just joined Washington State Commerce as director about 6 months ago. And prior to that, I was serving as U.S. Small Business Administration's regional administrator for the Pacific Northwest. So I oversaw SBA's operations for President Biden in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Alaska. And then before that, I spent 20 years in local government, various roles in Seattle, King, and Snohomish counties. And I was born in Spokane and raised in Eastern Washington, but have been on this side of the state for several decades now. So I'm still new to the Washington State Department of Commerce and learning every day about the investments and work that we're doing pretty much in every corner of the state. But I do want to I usually want to start with a little bit about the Department of Commerce itself and just orient folks to what our footprint and portfolio really includes. Because when people think about the Department of Commerce, most of the time folks think about economic development, trade, and business support. And yes, that is really core to our operations and what we do in the department. But in Washington State over time, we've built a Commerce Department that really reflects how our state's leadership views how we advance economic opportunity, community building, and we really think of this space as much broader than just business development. We also think of it as affordable housing. We think of it as renewable energy investment, clean tech, and our transformation into the green economy. It means broadband and infrastructure and digital equity investments. It also includes a portfolio of public works and infrastructure investments. We also fund community services and facilities and programs that really are part of a holistic vision of how we do community building across the state. So we have over 100 programs under our department with projects in every county, and how we layer and leverage those investments is a big part of what the State Department of Commerce does. So my hope is as folks engage tonight and we talk about issues, just want to flag a few themes and priorities that we're focused on right now. And one that I know, as Congresswoman Strickland talked about, is we really are at a very unique time with an incredible opportunity post-pandemic with a tremendous influx of investment from the federal level focused on a number of areas that my agency is involved with. And it really is a transformative opportunity to create jobs and position Washington State for the future. So I'm looking forward to talking about that and the work that is coming and the funding and opportunities coming from the federal level, pairing with the state's strong legacy around addressing climate change and emergent green economy opportunities. And we're really poised to take advantage and really ensure that the state really positions itself successfully going forward. So looking forward to your questions. As I mentioned, broad portfolio of service and programs, and hopefully, folks on the call learn a little bit about what our programs are doing and where we have opportunities for investment. But also, likewise, the other way around, I'm looking forward to hearing from folks in terms of how our agency can better support the people in the district and across the state. So thanks, Congresswoman. Looking forward to the conversation tonight. I'll turn it back over.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much. Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you, Director Fong, for those opening remarks. So now we're going to turn to some pre-submitted questions from constituents that were collected over the last couple of weeks. There were a couple of the topics that kind of rose to the top, so we thought we would just handle them at the beginning of this call. Once we have concluded that portion, we'll start taking questions live. So as a reminder to folks on the phone, to ask a question, please dial *3. And if you would like to subscribe to the Congresswoman's newsletter, please dial *6. So the first question, Congresswoman, are actually two related questions. One is from Wade in University Place, and one is from Abraham in DuPont. And both are about the Infrastructure and Jobs Act that you talked about, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. Wade from University Place said, the cost of living is so high right now for a family of four to go out to dinner, to buy groceries, to get prescriptions, to pay rent, to do anything right now is expensive. My salary is not keeping up with inflation. How can families keep up with inflation, and how is the Inflation Reduction Act helping? And then the second part, Congresswoman, is from Abraham from DuPont. He said, with all of this federal funding coming back to Washington State, how has the Inflation Reduction Act helped the local economy, and how do we find out more about the programs and funding coming back to this district? Congresswoman?
Right. Well, thank you, Wade and Abraham, for those questions. And you are absolutely correct. You know, one of the things I often hear people say is, you know, because the economy is actually strong in some cases, people are getting access to jobs, wages are going up, but it feels like all these things are happening that you have earned, but it feels like you can't get ahead because the cost of goods just keeps going up. And I think about, to what you mentioned, Wade, going out to dinner, it's expensive. The cost of prescriptions, paying rent. And so I'd say that there are probably about, 5 or 6 components that affect the things that you're discussing. When it comes to things like going out to dinner or buying groceries, there's this thing called a supply chain, right? It's, we manufacture things, we grow them, and then we put them on the shelves for people to purchase. But, the price of gas affects that. The ability to have enough workers to do the work does that. And then also, too, when there's high demand, prices tend to go up. So when the supply is lower and the price and the demand is higher, prices go up. And so some of the things that we've tried to do, I mentioned earlier the thing about the $35 a month cap on insulin as a prescription. We know that, families often spend money on prescription drugs, and that is insulin is one of the most, commonly used drugs. The other thing we're doing, too, which will take effect in probably a year or two, is that we're going to be able to negotiate the 10 most used prescription drugs and have Medicare negotiate those prices to bring those things down. With rent, we know that we have a housing crunch in the South Puget Sound, whether it is a single-family home that you want to purchase or renting an apartment, just because there are so many people moving to our area and the amount of housing that we're building is not keeping up with demand. And so some of the things that, we're looking at is trying to incentivize builders to build more housing, paying close attention to wages and benefits because that's incredibly important. And then really just, being mindful and acknowledging that we can talk about how unemployment is down and GDP is up, but if families don't feel as though they're benefiting from it and they don't feel like they're getting ahead, then we need to try to do better. One of the things that's important too, to Abraham's question is, what is the Inflation Reduction Act going to do to help the local economy? And again, I talked about the drugs that, are going to be cheaper to get. We're talking about incentives for people to help with utility bills. We're talking about tax incentives to build more affordable housing. We definitely, estimate that, gas prices will start to lower and even electricity rates by some of the Department of Energy investments that we're going to make in clean energy. And so I think the important thing here is that we can make all these investments in infrastructure and the Inflation Reduction Act, but it's important for me to hear from you about what your real experience is. Is it working? Is it not working? Another thing that we have available as we talk about expanding high-speed internet is that it's one thing to have internet built out to your home and your apartment, but if you can't afford it, it's still not accessible. And so qualifying families can actually get a discount on their monthly rate for high-speed internet. And so we have a myriad of programs that we are trying to push out. But I think one thing I would like to suggest is if you have a question about something, reach out to my office because we can try to help you direct you to the right agency or make you aware of things that are available. But I want you to understand that, I completely hear you when you say it feels like you're making more money, things are supposed to be better, but it just doesn't feel that way. And that is absolutely legit. And I want to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to try and help people who are reaching out to our office and reaching out to folks in my district.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And so now I'm going to turn this over to Director Fong. Director Fong, we got a couple questions related to what the Congresswoman was just talking about in terms of the IIJA funding and access to broadband. Dan from Yelm had a question for you. How can we get access to high-speed internet in rural portions of Thurston and Pierce counties?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dan. Thanks for surfacing it. So first, we're really excited that over some great work over the last 6 to 12 months, we're pleased to be able to share that Washington State will be the recipient of up to $1.2 billion for broadband infrastructure investment all across the state. So this is a real significant game changer for us. Because it goes at the very heart of the issue that you're asking about, which is how can we begin implementation and laying the fiber and getting the infrastructure in place to be able to reach rural populations with high-speed internet. And admittedly, the $1.2 billion will only go so far, and that's going to include additional leverage from state funding and also other matching dollars. But we think we're going to be able to get pretty significant reach out of the deployment of those resources. And we're right now in the throes of working with the federal agency responsible for reviewing our proposal and our approach as far as how we're going to go about dispersing those funds equitably across the state. So a few thoughts. One is that really crucial in this interim period of time while we're developing our planning and getting to a place where we'll start pushing out competitive processes for folks to apply for this funding to invest in this infrastructure, is that we want to make sure that we have gotten it right as far as where the gaps are in terms of access to high-speed internet. And this has been an ongoing effort through the FCC to do a nationwide mapping process to narrow in and to ensure that mapping is accurate, that it reflects where the infrastructure gaps are and where we could use the investment. So for us, for Washington State, we really want to make sure that map is as accurate as possible. So my first call to action here is whether you're in Yelm or other parts of Thurston and Pierce counties and rural areas, or you think that there's a service desert of broadband and high-speed internet in your area, you should go to broadbandmap.fcc.gov and just check to see whether or not your address or location is reflected as an area where there is a service gap. Because right now, even though we have already secured that $1.2 billion of potential funding, over the next several months, we want to continue to refine and make sure that we've got it right. Because once we get to the first quarter of next year and we finalize those maps by the end of March, that is going to be the footprint for where we will be looking for proposals for high-speed internet investment. So that's the first thing. Second is as local governments, PUDs, public utility providers, and the private sector, ISP providers, will be looking at then proposing infrastructure investments where these gaps are. And we're hopeful that sometime in the fall of next year, we will be able to push out our first tranche from that $1.2 billion, about $250 million or so, first round, where the funding will be awarded, and then at the end of next year and the beginning of the following year, I think we will start seeing where those investments are going to start to the build out, so to speak, of high-speed internet infrastructure across the state. So I know that's a little ways away, and there's still work to be done to make sure we get this right. But at the same time, the other piece of the puzzle I want to emphasize is for rural areas, underserved communities, other areas where we're looking to get this service to. We also want to make sure that we are investing from a digital equity standpoint, the supports and the tools to make sure that once that fiber is laid, that we also are able to deliver all of the potential benefits that come with that new opportunity. That includes entrepreneurship and e-commerce opportunities for folks that may be thinking about getting into small business. It includes telehealth. It includes other healthcare supports to reach remote and rural areas. It could include any number of other opportunity that might come with the new high-speed access. And we want to make sure that we bring the wraparound supports as well to ensure that we make the most of this once-in-a-generation investment. So stay tuned. Follow us on our website at commerce.wa.gov, and we'll make sure we keep folks up to speed as far as how we're going to deploy these new resources.
Thank you so much, Director Fong. Very much appreciate that. Congresswoman, I know you've gotten this question a lot lately, but for more folks to hear about this, George from Olympia is wondering, is there any hope of getting a functioning House of Representatives? When will a government shutdown happen again if the House of Representatives can't get it together? What services will be cut off? Who will be furloughed?
Well, thank you for that question, George, those questions. I find myself asking the same questions often. And, I want you to know that I'm a lifelong Democrat, but I am here in Washington, D.C. to work for the people, all the people in our district. And I am always willing to work in a bipartisan manner. And so, as you have witnessed this dysfunction for the past month or so, it is time that we have wasted instead of focusing on what we have to do to get our financial house in order to keep government open. We know that there are things happening around the world, and we want to support our allies. And more than anything, George, this dysfunction, it actually undermines people's trust in government. And, what I'm trying to do as, I'm here and working with, Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries is just, the same thing we've been saying. We're willing to work in a bipartisan manner, but we have to have willing partners. And, when we did the temporary continuing resolution to keep government open until November 17th, which, by the way, is next Friday, we cannot keep governing and lurching from crisis to crisis. But that resolution to keep government open was a bipartisan resolution. It required votes from both Democrats and Republicans. And so as we move forward, George, it is my hope that instead of trying to do something that's going to do harm to people to keep government open, we want to make sure that it's done in a bipartisan way. And, we talk about, what will a shutdown look like if it happens? And first and foremost, we don't want it to happen. But I want to make sure that those who are listening understand. So first of all, Social Security and SSI will not be affected. So you will be able to continue to get your Social Security checks and SSI checks even if the government shuts down. The same goes for pensions for retired federal workers and VA benefits for our veterans and their beneficiaries. And there is enough funding to cover Medicare, Medicaid, and disability insurance in the near term. But we also know that military service members and federal law enforcement officers will be expected to report for duty without pay. And while VA clinics will stay open, some programs like education and job training or housing assistance may be affected or temporarily unavailable. And if you are waiting to get help at some federal agencies like the Social Security Administration or even TSA, there may be possible delays at the airport if you're traveling. So I'm trying to really help people understand, how the shutdown could affect you. In the 10th District alone, possibly 17,000 federal employees will be furloughed. And people who are women and infants and children who were collecting food assistance, they will be affected. And so, we want to reassure you that there are some things that won't be affected, but on the other hand, the shutdown will affect us. Coming from local government as a former mayor, I can tell you that a government shutdown affects local and state and county government because a lot of local government relies on federal funding to do their jobs. And so it will have an effect on us. It will have an effect on the economy. And, for me, it's just not necessary. If we're dedicated to governing, if we take our jobs seriously, if we're willing to work in a bipartisan manner, we should be able to avoid a shutdown and, more than anything, stop lurching from crisis to crisis and just continue doing the work that we're supposed to do.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Director Fong, the next question is for you. It's another issue that I know you and your team at the Department of Commerce have been hearing about and the state has been working on. I know the Congresswoman's also been hearing about this. It comes from Jenny from Spanaway. She wrote in saying, I can't find affordable child care in my neighborhood. My last child care provider shut down because they couldn't find enough workers. How can we make this better for families?
Great. Thanks, Liz. And thanks, Jenny, for your question. First of all, I want to just start by saying I'm really sorry about the experience that you went through. And that struggle, as you know, undoubtedly, of finding childcare is something that we're hearing from every part of Washington State as well. The reality is that, and fortunately, we have had some broader work underway for the last couple of years now from the state legislature, from the governor, a formation of a task force that my agency has been convening to really look at this issue holistically, everything from the lack of child care availability to affordability and the costs, and then, of course, worker pay and livable wages for really what is a critical service that has such broad sweeping implications for our economy and for families all across the state. So I want you to know that the issue is top of mind for many, and we are working through lots of those issues. And I read recently that the Department of Children, Youth, Families estimates that there are about 278,000 children across the state under the age of 5 that need child care, and only about 26% of them have access to a licensed center or a preschool nearby. So we have a lot of work to do, and fortunately, in the Department of Commerce, we have a few programs that are very specifically focused on how do we build out the capacity for early learning facilities and for child care. And one program, a grant program that we have, makes funding available to providers to remodel, to purchase or construct new facilities and classrooms, make the necessary tenant improvements and other modifications so that they qualify and can be certified to provide child care services in the state. And we recently actually just put out funding availability in this space, and we'll be hopefully able to announce awards to help support and create new facilities beginning early next year. And then we'll continue to have other funding opportunities for minor renovations and other needs, which is so crucial to be able to come into code compliance, get licensing, to be able to get more folks able to provide child care services in our communities. Now, beyond infrastructure and construction funding, we've also been providing some grants to communities for a few years now, where they are essentially planning grants and coordination grants to help local groups and organizations and nonprofits and even government partners to get together and take a look at what they can do to create more child care capacity within their communities. And often these grants start to lay the foundation for identifying where there might be opportunities for folks that come in for our grant programs for the facility construction portion of the funding need. So we're hoping that we can build that pipeline, help people get into the space, and then also start to just literally build more facilities that can make more childcare available. But as I started, this is a complex area that has a full ecosystem of things that are needed, some of which don't fall under the purview of my department, but we're working closely with other departments across the state, local governments, and continue to look at ways where we can support childcare capacity expansion. Now, incidentally, just as a side note, in my many years of working in the city of Seattle, one of the programs that that I personally, but we were most proud of at the time a few years back, was the ability to begin a full-scale public subsidy program for high-quality pre-K across the city, and with an aim towards ultimately getting to universal availability for all 3- and 4-year-olds across the city. And frankly, the reality is that the state has to have a much more robust conversation about how we're going to resource this area of need, because it truly is a fundamental policy interest for us to find a way to make sure that we are able to have affordable, high-quality childcare and preschool for our kids across the state. So a lot more work needed there. We have a few program areas that we can point folks to. Our sister agencies also have opportunities for subsidies and grants to help with the affordability side of the equation. So again, look us up on our website. One of my team can circle back with more advice and counsel as far as where there might be help now or on the horizon.
Thank you so much, Director Fong. I appreciate that. So for folks on the phone, just a reminder that if you would like to ask a question, please dial *3. And if you would like to subscribe to the Congresswoman's newsletter, please dial *6. Again, that's *3 to ask a question and *6 to subscribe to the Congresswoman's newsletter. So the next question is for the Congresswoman. And Congresswoman, I know you've been talking and hearing from many constituents and stakeholders on this issue, and I know and I'm seeing that many on the call this evening are asking a similar question, so we thought we would just compile all the different asks into one question. Congresswoman, Amanda from Spanaway actually originally wrote in, I think, a week or two ago, but again, many people on tonight are asking a similar question. They're wondering if you could share kind of your position on what's happening in the Gaza Strip and with Israel, and what's your current position on the issue, and how can we support getting humanitarian aid in there and healthcare support to those who need it as quickly as possible.
Great. Well, thank you for that question, Amanda, and I'm sure some other callers are asking similar questions. And, first of all, it's hard to believe that it has already been 1 month since that horrific attack that happened on October 7th. And the death of thousands of innocent civilians, as well as over 200 people who were kidnapped by Hamas, a terrorist organization, demands a response. And, I think that when I have this conversation with folks, depending on your age and your generation, I think it's always important to provide some historical context. So if you already know this, I apologize in advance for being redundant, but I think context is so incredibly important in this conversation. So let's go back to the Holocaust, where 6 million Jewish people were murdered, civilians, people were murdered for just being who they were. The biggest horrible genocide and act of anti-Semitism we've ever witnessed. And I talk about that particular event because it really informs a lot about the state of Israel, what they've been through, how people view the world when they think about anti-Semitism, and really the whole conversation about, the attack that happened on October 7th. And Hamas, who runs Gaza right now, slaughtered civilians on October 7th. These were not military combatants or people who were doing anything other than living their lives in Israel. And I know that people are concerned about their response to Hamas's terrorist attack and concerned about the safety of Palestinians and innocent civilians who have been caught in all of this. The terrible thing about these types of attacks is that innocents get caught in it, and we value every life. What's happened recently, however, I know that I read today that President Biden has been able to guide Israel into having, I think, pauses for a few hours a day to help Palestinians in Gaza find safe passage and to get out of Gaza. Also to bring in humanitarian assistance to try and help folks. I have and I will continue to urge the administration to ensure that basic life essentials, food, water, medicine are made available to innocents in Gaza and other conflict-affected areas, and also providing access to safe zones in southern Gaza for civilians and non-combatants who seek refuge. It is incumbent upon Hamas and the Israeli Defense Force to ensure humanitarian relief reaches the people who need it. Now, I know that some people have called for a ceasefire, but fundamentally, Hamas has to decide that they are interested in peace as well. And we have to put the hostages here to make sure that they are returned. We have to be able to trust that Hamas would actually even comply to a ceasefire, and calls to do so at this time are premature. And this is a very complex issue. You know, I just turned 61 years old in September. And as long as I can remember, in every decade of my life, I have watched conflict in that part of the world. And when Bill Clinton was president, they were very close to having a two-state solution. But one of the parties walked away from it, so it didn't happen. And I tell folks that everybody, whether you're Israeli or Palestinian, wants peace and prosperity. But in order to have peace, you have to have two parties who want it. And dealing with Hamas right now has to be something that the Israeli Defense Force focuses on. Hamas is a terrorist organization. They have been funded by bad actors. And if we are serious about having peace and prosperity, then we have to deal with Hamas, because Hamas is not good for the Palestinian people. They are not good for peace. And they have shown by their brutal attack on civilian non-combatants that they have to be dealt with first. But it's going to be heartbreaking. It's going to be difficult. But I want you all to know that we are doing everything we can to make sure that Palestinians get safe passage, that they get fair warning, and that they're getting their basic life essentials. And we're doing everything we can to minimize casualties and harm to the Palestinian people.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We're next going to turn to two questions that are actually for both you, Congresswoman, and you, Director Fong. This first question is for Tom from Tacoma. And Congresswoman, I'll ask that you respond first, and then Director Fong, if you don't mind going second. But Tom's question is about crime. He says, crime seems to be everywhere, violent crime especially. Over the summer, lots of kids were involved in violence, especially gun violence. How are our local communities being supported by programs or funding from the federal government to increase our community's safety?
Okay, well, thank you very much for that question, Tom. And, you know, when you think about some of the basic functions of government, public safety is one of them. And, you know, even when I talk about the work that I do, I talk about wanting communities that are safe, just, and secure. So when we think about crime, let's just talk about gun violence for a second, because we know that there has been an uptick in gun violence. I think there are a few things that we need to ask ourselves. Number one, how is it that so many kids are getting access to guns? And I asked this question when I was at a round table a few months ago, and I was told that they are stolen from cars, purchased from people who are intentionally selling illegal guns to kids. And so I think there has to be something from a policy standpoint in dealing with the folks who are illegally selling guns to minors. The other thing, too, we have to ask ourselves is, you know, why do so many young men think that gun violence is how you solve problems? If you look at the statistics, it is mostly males, mostly of a certain age. And we have to ask ourselves, you know, why are they turning to gun violence if they feel as though they've been disrespected, or they feel as though they've been excluded, or they feel like they're embarrassed about something? What is going on in their psyches to make them think that that's how you solve problems? And then finally, we talk about reducing gun violence by supporting, crisis responders, doing what we can to provide funding to police departments. I recently secured $3 million in funding for the Tacoma Police Department to hire about 20 community service officers and designated crisis responders. And these professionals will assist Tacoma PD in responding to calls and trying to de-escalate situations to reduce the likelihood of use of force. But also, too, asking ourselves, when the police have been called, typically something bad has already happened. And so there has to be investment in the prevention part of this. I recently went to an after-school program at a middle school, and it was really in response to some of the gun violence, but trying to find a safe place for young people to hang out, to engage in positive activity, to socialize. And so it really has to be a holistic approach when it comes to safety, finding things for young people to do so they don't feel like they have to commit crime. And then also, too, admitting that there is a nexus with some of the crime and safety with drug use. Every person who commits gun violence isn't on drugs, but people who are using drugs sometimes engage in that type of violence, too. And so I know that crime is something that we are consistently hearing about. We want to do our part at the federal level, but really it's doing what we can to support what local government wants to do, local social service programs, local opportunities for young kids, and holding people accountable who are illegally selling guns to young people.
Thanks, Congresswoman. Director Fong, I know the Department of Commerce has some grants and special programs that are kind of related to this, if you'd like to comment.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. And first, I'll just say I think Congresswoman Strickland has tremendous expertise and experience in this space, and particularly as she's describing a holistic response. And I think her background both as a mayor and now in Congress is just invaluable in terms of how we think about both going upstream with prevention investments and then the real-time investments around public safety that are so crucial at the local level. For commerce, our investments tend to be on the prevention side of the equation. And as Liz mentioned, we do have a number of grant programs and other emphasis areas where we're focus a lot on youth and young adults and violence prevention efforts. In the 10th congressional district specifically, over the last couple of years, we've had some investments where we provided support to Tacoma's expansion of their neighborhood and community services departments, service delivery to youth and young adults, violence reduction efforts. We've, through our community law enforcement partnership program, we've had grants to Safe Streets campaign in Tacoma and with the Puyallup tribes for at-risk youth partnership projects. But we have some interesting resources coming that I think are worth flagging that touch this space in an important way. The legislature recently tasked my department with developing a strategy to invest a fairly sizable amount of resources, up to $200 million, as part of something that's referred to as the Community Reinvestment Program. And this was really has a driving focus around how we make thoughtful, strategic, and intentional investments to communities who are negatively impacted by the war on drugs. So these investments will really be focused on supporting nonprofits and communities in looking at ways that we could start going upstream as far as supporting communities in entrepreneurship, home ownership, and generational wealth building, mentorship opportunities, expanding reentry programs and legal aid and support in a whole host of ways, but also done in a way that's really community-driven and really changing the lens for which we're looking at the challenges on the ground, but also relying heavily upon community itself to inform where those dollars should go and how they should be invested. So a little bit of a preview of coming attractions. We'll be looking at starting to roll out those resources over the next several months, and hopefully it we'll touch on Tom's question about how we can look at the investment in our community holistically with an eye towards increasing community safety with some of these types of strategies. So we're in this space and looking forward to more discussion about it.
Great. And I wanted to add something to this, too, because I want to talk a bit about the comments I made around what is happening with our young men, because young men are more likely to commit gun violence than any other demographic. And I think part of it, too, is just acknowledging that, in many ways we do have a mental health crisis, and mental health crises come in many different ways and on a very large continuum. And so, investing in programs in schools, or even when, people are younger, so that if they need to talk about something, if they're feeling uncomfortable, that we're destigmatizing the idea that it's okay to express your feelings and talk about what's happening. I will tell you that I am really chagrined at times about how young people treat each other on social media and how that ends up spilling off into what happens when they see each other personally. And so just really thinking about, even as part of the curriculum in school, how social skills are incredibly important, and the ability to solve problems face-to-face with people and to de-escalate situations is part of this. But I think it's a very holistic approach we have to take. But, mental health, asking ourselves, how on earth do these young people even get access to guns? And then making sure that we're supporting law enforcement so that when they're responding to this, you have community service officers, and at the same time, holding people accountable as well. So again, it's a holistic approach, but I really wanted to talk about the mental health aspect of this.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you, Dr. Fong. So here's another topic that we've gotten a couple questions on over the last week and then tonight, and so I'm going to Miles wrote in from University Place. It's about small business support. So he expanded his small business to storefront just after the economy began opening. I know that small businesses like mine are still struggling after the pandemic. We struggle with high credit card processing fees, paying back pandemic loans, getting goods into our stores and the cost of those goods, hiring and keeping employees, theft, safety. I know there's support coming back to our cities. How can we as small business owners, engage in those programs or funding?
Okay, well, I will start with this, and then I'll have Mike jump in. And, first of all, thank you for the question, Miles. I am such a big fan of small businesses because, as you know, in many ways they are neighborhood anchors. And having a brick and mortar store or a storefront is a very high-risk proposition, especially the challenges that we had with the pandemic. I know that, for example, we talked about some of the pandemic loans, and one of the things that you may want to consider is seeing if there's a way to get that loan forgiven. I know that when we had the American Rescue Plan funding go out to cities, that a lot of them said that we are reserving some funding to help out our small businesses. So you may want to go to your city and see if they have any sort of program embedded in there. I think the other thing, too, that's really interesting, Miles, is that I have heard from a lot of different types of small businesses about the credit card processing fees. And for those of you listening who don't understand how this works, credit cards charge fees of the retailers in order to use the card. And because there's no real competition, you have a couple of banks who have a monopoly on it, so they charge high fees. And so I know that there is a move here in Congress to look at those fees and to basically be transparent and allow competition. I don't know where that is right now, but that's something that I've heard from a few retailers in the district. And so we want to make sure that we're supporting our neighborhood businesses. I know it's a credit card processing fees. I heard from one business who said that what she pays in credit card processing fees could be raises and one more FTE every year. And so it's something that I'm taking very seriously, and we will look into it. Mike, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, thanks, Congresswoman, and thanks, Miles, for the question. This one is, hits home for me in a number of ways, in part because I grew up in a family that was restaurateur and small business owners. And as I mentioned earlier, having served as regional director for the Small Business Administration, I definitely have seen up close the challenges that our small business owners have been facing coming through the pandemic. And as the Congresswoman mentioned, we lots of resources have gone in from the federal to the state to the local level to support small businesses in terms of bridging folks as much as we could to get through the challenges of the pandemic. And frankly, even as recently as just a few months ago in Thurston and Pierce County, my agency has still funded several businesses with millions of dollars in relief funding that has continued to be a lifeline to so many small business owners as we continue to try to get back to a growth trajectory when it comes to small businesses. So a couple of quick thoughts. The one is that do take advantage, whether those be resources at the local level through my agency, State Commerce, or SBA and elsewhere, but the foundational business development, business support, counseling, advice, thought partner work that's provided by the Small Business Development Centers and the Women's Business Center and the Veterans Business Centers are so crucial because sometimes just having someone be able to engage with you and just look at some of the foundational elements of your business plan and where things are headed and what you can do to make some adjustments to put yourself in a position to be able to grow your business and thrive in the long run is worthwhile. And I really always encourage people to kick the tires on those options and see if there may be some nuggets of advice that could be helpful for the long run. In addition to that, we do have more program support coming very soon. And again, they often in the form of low interest or no interest loans or different types of working capital opportunities. And we're really excited at State Commerce to soon to be rolling out the State Small Business Credit Initiative funding from the federal government, where we'll be able to deploy new loans, low interest working capital loans, revenue-based capital access programs, new programs that give folks collateral support to assist small businesses that are having trouble qualifying for financing. We'll have some new commercial real estate support programming that be focused on socially and economically disadvantaged individuals that are in small business. And then we actually are going to start having a little bit of venture capital access programming too, which, again, all of these geared towards helping small business owners and entrepreneurs that may not otherwise be able to qualify for a traditional commercial loan from a bank. And I really encourage folks to look into these options, call our offices as we start to roll out some of these new tools, because they could very well be options that fit folks both to bridge through immediate needs, but also think about long-term growth and sustainability of your operations. So we hope to have some new programs in play, but again, check us out on our website, and hopefully there's some tools that we can make available to you.
Thank you, Director Fong. And I just looked at the time, and wow, we are getting close to end time. So I have 2 questions left that we are going to ask, and I just want to thank the callers on the line. There have been so many wonderful questions that people have submitted, and if you haven't been able to get through, please contact us through the Congresswoman's website, strickland.house.gov. But Director Fong, given we have a couple of minutes left, I'm going to quickly turn this over to you, and then I have one last question for the Congresswoman. The next question is from Jeff from Tumwater. He's wondering that, with Washington State leading on the clean and green energy front, can you share a little bit more about how these programs are going to benefit Washingtonians over the next couple of years?
Great. Thanks, Liz, and thanks, Jeff, for the question. It's a great question. We're super excited about this space because I think there's just an incredible amount of new resources flowing into the state for this very specific objective. So and I know we're short on time, so I'll just mention we've got funding, new funding, state and federal funding to do so much in this space. New investments for EV charging stations. We've got funding for clean energy grants for tribes. We've got new money for energy efficiency retrofits for public buildings, weatherization, solar, heat pumps. I mean, you name it. We are getting a lot of new public funding to help incentivize, create rebates, other mechanisms to get folks to see the direct benefit of these investments, these clean energy investments that will bring down utility bills, good for the environment. And then the residual impact of all of this is it's creating a ton of new jobs and industry sector innovation in this clean energy space. That's going to be great for our economy. So all this to say, I really think this is an area of tremendous opportunity, both from a workforce development, job creation, economic development standpoint, but also for direct benefit to families and residents across the state in terms of how we can make these resources available to help bring down the cost of some of these great energy cost-saving opportunities. Last thing I'll leave you with on this topic is that critically important as we move through the green economy transformation, that we don't leave folks behind. We got to make sure that the benefits of all this new economic activity accrue to people all across the state and every corner of the state, for people that are low income, rural, underserved communities. And that's why we're going to be building out as much of this strategy as possible to make sure we reach as many folks as possible. And I know this has been, we are appreciative and very thankful for the resources coming from the federal government, and Washington State. I assure you that Washington State is poised to really take advantage of these opportunities to leverage and make sure that we make the most of these clean energy opportunities.
And I would also add, too, that we also want to make sure that we are not leaving behind workers as they transition into clean energy fields as well. And so I think that's also as equally, if not as more important, as we talk about this transition.
Yeah, thank you, Congresswoman. And Congresswoman, in that vein, the last question that we'll do is actually from Ron. He wanted to know what your thoughts were on the economy and budget.
So as we talk about the economy and budget, those are not just like really easy terms to define. So when we talk about an economy in a place like the United States, I think the pandemic is always a good starting point, because we know that there were challenges during the pandemic. We reopened, and I think that in many ways some people thought that we would instantly just go back to where we were. But things are getting better. You often hear the fact that unemployment is very low right now. Wages are up. Gross domestic product is high. And at the same time, we still hear from people saying, yeah, all those great things have happened, but it's still hard for me to make ends meet, and it doesn't feel like I'm getting ahead. And so I think it's always important for us as policymakers to always think about this. We know that the economy was very, very hot, and so the feds did raise the interest rates. And unfortunately, when you raise interest rates, it also makes things more expensive. So whether you're getting a loan for a car or trying to buy a house, those high interest rates don't necessarily make you feel like things are getting better. But I think it's also important too that, as we talk about ways we can get more money into people's pockets, that's what's important here. The federal gas tax has not been raised in over 20 some odd years. And at the same time, people talk about challenges at the pump, and it seems almost counterintuitive, because we are getting record barrels of oil right here in the United States. The federal gas tax has not been raised in years, but people are still feeling pain at the pump. At the same time, we're trying to do what we can with the infrastructure bill, lowering the cost of high-speed internet so it's affordable for people, doing what we can to lower utility bills, strengthening our supply chain, all the things that we can do, because when we move people, when we move goods, when we have workers to do the work, costs do in fact go down. So things have gotten better, but if it doesn't feel that way, there's more that we need to do. We're investing in our ports and our waterways because we know lots of goods and services come and go from there. We're investing in rail. We're investing in public transportation so you don't always have to drive a car to get to work and be part of the economy. And we're doing everything we can to build more housing, whether it's through tax credits and finding ways to support the building community. On the budget, we know that the House majority right now is proposing a budget that's going to drastically cut every federal agency, including the IRS, which we are trying to plus up so that they can help you get your refunds faster. And so we're doing everything we can to make sure that we are not doing anything that's going to harm people. And making these drastic cuts is actually going to affect a lot of parts of people's lives, including the economy, the safety issues we've talked about, and really just draconian things that are going to do more harm than good. So I continue to support a budget that is responsible, that helps every American and lifts people up instead of doing things to hurt them. But it's going to be something that's very challenging. We've got the shutdown looming next Friday. We try to find bipartisan ways to work together. And so I just tell folks, I will always keep working. I will always keep working. And what I need to hear more than anything is from you and how you feel things are working for you. But I appreciate that question. So thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And we are essentially at time. So what I'm going to do is, Director Fong, if you just want to give a quick summary, and then we'll turn it over to the Congresswoman to talk about how her and her team are here to help folks via her constituent services team. So Director Fong, you go first.
Great, thanks, Liz. And Congresswoman Strickland, I want to thank you for creating this opportunity. It's been great. The questions have been incredibly interesting and gave us an opportunity to talk a little bit about what Washington State Department of Commerce is doing. Looking forward to continuing to hear from folks from the 10th Congressional District. Hopefully we've given some glimpse at this very broad portfolio of work that we have in our agency. And I would just encourage folks to, look us up on the web at commerce.wa.gov. Give us a glance in terms of some of the program areas that we're focused on and opportunities that we have available. And at the end of the day, we're in the business of investing in what I say is Washington's most important asset, our people. And that's where we're going to be, and that's where we're going to focus to strengthen communities. And again, appreciate the chance to spend a little time with you all, and looking forward to hearing from you more soon. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Mike. And I just want to thank Liz for moderating tonight, and thank you to everyone who joined us on this call. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but we tried to cover a breadth of issues that came up. But I would say that, over the past few months, I've continued to hear concerns about how our federal government is functioning. You have seen the dysfunction for a month. The majority went through 9 different people to find a Speaker of the House. So I am hopeful that now we have a Speaker and we're facing a shutdown and people are looking to us to govern, that we're going to find a way to come up with bipartisan solutions to do this together. Because the only way this is going to work is if we're able to reach across the aisle, just like we did to keep government open until the 17th of November, and keep working together. But I want you all to know that, I will continue to want to hear from you. We are very proud of our military population here in the 10th Congressional District. Veterans Day is coming up, so to all the veterans, thank you for your service, and we look forward to honoring you over the weekend. But I want you to know that my office is always going to be available to you. If you need help, make sure you reach out to us at strickland.house.gov. This year alone, my office has helped hundreds of people recover over $2 million from the federal government, whether that's through the IRS, through veterans benefits, or Social Security. So we are here to work on the bread and butter of government. We want to be high functional. We want to do our jobs, and we want to make sure that you view us as an asset. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. I appreciate it so much. Happy Veterans Day to all the veterans. And as always, it is my honor and privilege to represent the 10th Congressional District of Washington State. Thank you.